let's get started. First of all, what we are talking about here today fits in the category of pattern thinking, thinking in patterns. Here's a quote by Bateson who says, there's a pattern that connects the crab to the lobster and the primrose to the orchid, and all of them to me and me to you. What is that pattern? This seeking commonalities and similarities across different phenomena is a way of seeking meaning and connections. We've had a lot of philosophers who have basically been interested in finding patterns. Heraclitus says that the cosmos speaks to us in patterns. And if you're familiar with astrology, astrology is the language of patterns. So the ancients were looking at the skies and observing their feelings and their emotions and trying to map what they felt inside to what they saw out there. And out of these efforts and attempts, astrology was made. So what we are trained to do is to seek differences, find differences, no matter how meaningless they are. So seeking similarities and patterns is not something that we are trained for. So today we want to look at this new approach or attitude, which somehow is about finding meaningful similarities between seemingly different entities, not seeing meaningless differences between visibly similar entities. So we are very much trained to do the first, not the second. So here we want to see these meaningful similarities, what importance or significance they can create for us. And a person who's done a great job with this is Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell created the monomyth. He studied mythology and different myths from different nations, from different parts of the world, the Greek mythology, the Roman mythology, what the Aztecs had written, and the natives in America, and the Chinese. And then he saw that there is some patterns that connects these mythical stories. There's mythical motifs. He saw that there is always this archetype of the hero. It may take many different faces, but the journey is the same. The journey of the hero remains the same. So he wrote this book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, late in the 40s. And that was the beginning of a movement in, let's say, art and basically in script writing and seeking these type of motifs or patterns in different aspects of our lives. So I was personally inspired by that a lot. Joseph Campbell talks about myths as some collective dreams. He talks about myths as psychological experiences turned into images. Here I think you're hearing some echo. Yourself on mute. Yeah. So psychological experiences turn to images. So he doesn't look at them, in our language, we say, this is just a myth or the myth of something. So we treat mythology and myth as, let's say, a version of, let's say, facts around us that are probably not true. But according to Joseph Campbell, these are psychological experiences that are turned into images over aeons. There are guides to what is yet to happen and maps that point us past what we have known how to control. So it's a map to go into these unknown worlds, into the mystery and the mysterious worlds where we don't have any control over things. And finally, we have symbols that carry the human spirit forward in counteraction to those that tend to tie it back. This is basically how he defines myth and mythology. I personally was drawn into this world when I started reading some Western mythology. I grew up in Iran and I was exposed to a lot of mythical stories and poetry in Iran. And in one of these stories, there's a hero that goes through 7 labors. This is in the book Epic of the Kings by the great Iranian poet Ferdowsi. And in the first labor, the hero confronts a lion. And then when I was reading the myth of the Hercules and 12 labors of the Hercules, I noticed that the first labor there is also the lion. So this got me very curious about this similarity between these two mythical stories that were hundreds of years and thousands of miles away, basically. So this was what sparked my interest, and a little bit of research. I stumbled upon the work of Joseph Campbell. This has been used a lot, as I told you, in forming different narratives in movies and in art. There's a book called The Writer's Journey that actually somehow codifies this knowledge for writers and how they can use this to create narratives that resonate at an archetypal level with individuals. These are some examples. Any movie that goes from 1, 2, 3, is carrying this type of archetypal pattern within it. So what is the monomyth? The monomyth is in basically 4 phases. Starts with a departure, a descent, a fulfillment or an initiation, and a return. So this is what Joseph Campbell figured out, that no matter where the myth comes from, there's always these phases and there's always these 12 steps. Now, in some of the myths, some of them are more pronounced, and some are downplayed and are not as basically pronounced as others. Now, we want to go through this monomyth together and understand it better. I try to find as many examples as possible from the pop culture so that we can relate to the motifs and the ideas here. So the first phase is departure. It's leaving what's comfortable behind and going into the unknown. And afterwards is descent into the depth of darkness, confronting some evil forces. Probably first we can't overcome them, then we gain some knowledge, and thanks to that we can overcome these forces, and then there's a moment of fulfillment or initiation, and then we return. Now, we have seen these a lot in different movies. In Harry Potter, you saw, for instance, that at the beginning he was living in this house, not very happy. There is always the beginning of the hero's journey with a lack, an imbalance, a feeling of frustration, unhappiness, which the hero probably tries to somehow suppress by using some defense mechanisms. For instance, we are unhappy about what we do, then we buy a bigger television, or I don't know, we go on a very expensive trip. We try to do many other things to just somehow create the illusion that we are happy. So sometimes we try to force some of these defense mechanisms or suppression mechanisms in order not to feel that lack or unhappiness. So there may be calls for the adventure, but we may not hear it. But until the fact that the protests of the psyche, the protests become so loud and clear, like in Harry Potter, when the whole house was covered by the owls. The first owl came, he didn't see it, didn't pay attention, and then the whole house was covered by an owl. Then he had to somehow respond to the call to the adventure. We have seen these motifs in different movies as well. Follow the White Rabbit, something mysterious allures us into this mystical realm of the adventure. In Alice in Wonderland, going down the rabbit hole was the same thing. So going and crossing this threshold into something which is mysterious and which is not usual or ordinary. The red pill, the blue pill, depending on which one you take, you may stay in the normal world or go to the special one. And then when you want to go to the special world, there are always tests that you need to pass. So, we've seen it in different movies. You cannot enter some certain areas. There is the guards of the castle in The Wizard of Oz, and there are the stormtroopers that you have to go beyond. So you have to somehow pass a test. Your determination is put to test to see whether you're really determined. And some of these people who test our determination are not outside, out there. They are inside, within us, a high level of salary, a comfortable job, mortgages to pay, and things of this sort may somehow create this feeling of force of inertia. At the entrance of many old cities, ancient cities, there are the figures of the lions. These lions are playing the role of guardians of these threshold between the normal world and the special world. So somehow to intimidate people who want to go into the city but are not fully determined or a bit half-hearted from taking the journey onward. But once you take the journey onward and you're past these thresholds, then you go somewhere very far, some place that bears no resemblance to what you know, because the rules are different, the players are different, the architecture of that area is different. You remember in Wizard of Oz, Toto, I have a feeling we're not in Kansas anymore. You're not in Kansas anymore. Things are different. And therefore, we've seen it also in many different other motifs. We have the bar scene in Star Wars, Hogwarts, and the arrival scene in Apocalypse Now, when the first role actor went into the new space, and where people were looking different, and there were different adventures awaiting him there. And afterwards, what you need to do is to learn. As we saw in Matrix, he started learning a lot of things, languages, martial arts, and there were some few tests that he needed to pass in order to qualify for the grand adventure. And once you're ready, the grand adventure starts. And like Jonah and the whale, you sometimes are swallowed by the force or by the sheer amount of change that happens around you. It's so overwhelming. And it's basically so larger than life that it swallows you, it overwhelms you. You may be eaten like the Red Riding Hood by the wolf, and you have to go into the belly of the whale, into the darkest places, face the basically the fiercest opponents and the darkest forces. And out of these confrontations, you may not come alive. So there is a motif of death and resurrection that happens. So something dies and something else is born. Something is given birth to. Joseph Campbell says the dark night of the soul comes just before revelation. When everything is lost and all seems darkness, then comes a new life and all that is needed. So we have seen this also in different movies, that there is this death and resurrection. Neo died and then was brought back to life by Trinity. And then he no longer had to run away from Agent Smiths. He could stand there and face them, because he had gained, there was some sort of a elevation in the state of consciousness or ability or the competence of Neo. We have seen this also in other mythical motifs. Theseus, led by the thread of Ariadne, goes in and slaughters the Minotaur. So there's always some sort of a help that comes, and at that darkest hour, something emerges that equips the hero with what he needs to have to go to the next phase of the adventure and conquer the dark forces. This may not happen the first time around. And afterwards, there is some sort of achievement. There is a boon, there is a sword that the hero takes and brings back. There's the fire theft that we know Prometheus did. There is the Philosopher's Stone that is gained. And all of them somehow signify a gain in knowledge, a gain in wisdom, in awareness, discernment. Being able, the sword is something that cuts through. You can somehow cut what is needed away from what is not needed. Basically, what we have with Prometheus, the light, the fire that brings light, it can shine light upon areas that are unknown and not visible. And the Philosopher's Stone is something that turns prima materia, what is basically not precious, into precious stones. So there is something alchemical, there is something that enables us to achieve something once we have gone through the adventure. And T.S. Eliot says these type of adventures, they go on. They do not stop. It's not just a one-off. We shall not cease from exploration. At the end of all our exploring, we will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. So there is going and coming back. These adventures happen. Next time around, we need to somehow face some forces that are more fierce, more basically deeply embedded in our psyche, and then come back with bigger boons and basically bigger elixirs back again to the normal life and start the Odyssey again. So you can see it, there is a shift in the consciousness. This is not a two-dimensional, let's say, model. There's a shift in the third dimension. There is a gain. We can see this also in nature. This is not something that just happens in the mythology out there or in movies. In nature, it happens in the northern hemisphere. You start from where the nights are shortest, the days are longest, something around 21st of June, the sun starts its cycle, and then actually the earth starts a cycle around the sun, and then goes to 21st of September, where basically the length of the days and the nights are equal. It goes to the depth of darkness in around 21st of December. That is basically when we face the longest nights. So the nights get shorter until we reach the longest night, and then from that point on, the days become longer until again they're equal in length to the nights, and we're back again to the realm of light and brightness in spring and in summer. Now, in Iran, we celebrate two of these points, two of our most famous celebrations, traditions come from two of these points. First one is the return of the hero, 21st of March. Our new year begins the 21st of March when the hero comes back to the normal world after its adventure. We put together some items for a ritual, an altar we prepare, and this is very significant for Iranians. And the other one that we celebrate is the other point, is the depth of darkness. We also put together an altar, and that is also happening at around the same time that Christmas happens in the West. So if you look at the altar that we prepare for that longest night of the year where we celebrate, it has pieces of fruit that all have red colors. And if you look at the Christmas tree, it's shining with color and light as well. So somehow these traditions are rooted in the same mythology. They are celebrating the birth of light. So the Christmas tree is somehow signifying the birth of the, let's say, rays of light as the sun is rising through the east, as these rays of light pass through the branches of the Christmas tree. So this somehow is a celebration of light and brightness and sun. So now after these two interpretations of the hero's journey or the archetype of the hero, there is one more task for us left to do, and that is looking at it in an inward way, in an inward fashion, taking it inward. And this is a challenge for all of us, especially these days, living in a world of outer distractions. Everything around us is somehow they're designed in a way to distract us from this inner journey or this inner interpretation or inner meaning finding that we have. And we look at a lot of things in the outer world. We can name a lot of outer world objects. It could be movies, it could be experiences that we have in the outer world. It could be jobs, it could be courses, grades, buildings, whatever you name it. But when it comes to the world of inner objects, which is emotions, subjectivity, fantasies, these, let's say, symbols that exist, these basically visions or dreams or this world of inner objects, that's the world that is a little bit unfamiliar for us. So all of these, let's say, motifs that we talked about, the night sea journey, the belly of the whale, the dark forest, they're not out there, according to this interpretation. They are within us. So the journey is not a journey in the outer world, it's a journey into the inner world. From the world where we know what we are familiar with, what we are good at doing, the part of our psyche that we know, comprehend, and control, to the part that is dark and it's menacing, and at times it's very intimidating for us to explore. So this is an inner journey, and this journey requires us to go past and beyond the assumptions that we hold. David Bohm talks about the fact that when we interpret outer events or experiences that we have, we get some emotional reactions. These emotional reactions are the result of our assumptions. The assumptions the assumptions form the ways we observe, but the assumptions are never looked at. So the journey to the inner world requires a revisiting of those assumptions that we have, the most subtle assumptions, the ones that we hardly know that we hold, and somehow revisiting them, bringing them to light, shining some rays of consciousness upon them, and understanding them and challenging them, transcending paradigms, basically. So knowing what paradigm we are identifying with and transcending it when something else comes along. So being open to being challenged and some sort of a disidentification with the paradigms or the assumptions that we have. And it's somehow about withdrawal and letting go. It's somehow about not being or not feeling the necessity of being in control, letting go of planning and somehow accepting and welcoming what comes. This is what Joseph Campbell says about this. It's somehow about reunification of the psyche, according to Mary-Louise von Franz, who says that somehow we should start functioning in accordance with a core within us. So a hero is an archetypal figure which presents a model of an ego functioning in accordance with the self. And the self with the capital S is that guiding force within us, that voice within, that somehow is suppressed because of the outward circumstances and the rewards and the motivations that exist. So listening and tuning in into this intuition or to the voice within, and somehow creating coherence across different compartments of our psyche. So this means that she talks about this compartmentalization. It says a decaying civilization is a civilization in which you can find a lot of compartments. Things are neatly packed. Sometimes in our behavior and the way we behave, things are also neatly packed. If our boss says something to us, we do not react. If our partner says the same thing, we show a very, let's say, heavy reaction. So this shows that our psyche is compartmentalized. We divide our time. So, okay, this is work, and then after work, I will have some fun and learning somewhere else. So we divide our psyche into compartments, our time into compartments, our world around us into compartments. So this compartmentalization of the psyche results in a decay, results in a neurosis. So the task is to go into the inner world and to seek coherence in different psychic forces that are residing within us, somehow bringing them into a harmony, an inner harmony. And this gains a special importance for those of us who are in the midlife. This midlife is not a chronological one, that to say, okay, this is, if you live 100 years, then midpoint is 50 years. This is the point that we have developed our ego disposition. We have done our university studies. We have chosen a career. We have become good at doing that. And then at some point, we have left something behind. So there's a calling from deep within telling us that something has been left behind. We need to integrate those pieces of ourselves that we had to leave behind because we had to adapt to the outer world, be it the career, be it the societal forces, and so on and so forth. So Dante also experienced that. Jung also experienced that. So this is a journey in which in the midway, you find yourself in a dark forest, especially in the midlife crisis that we talk about, is a crisis in search of vision and purpose and meaning in life. And this meaning only happens in an inner quest, going inside and unifying the different bits and pieces of our psyche, the sub-personalities that we have developed along the way. And somehow we can say that our ego has become petrified, a bit rigid by that point, because we have probably been very one-sided, doing a set of things in one direction, very result-oriented, looking at achievements or rewards from the outer world. And if you remember from The Lord of the Ring, there was this scene when Gandalf goes and somehow rejuvenates Theoden. So there is this change from petrification to plasticity. Things become somehow again fluid, and that fluidity comes only as a result of being in touch with those forces within us that are in the unconscious, that we are not very much in tune with. And we have seen this in a lot of fairy tales or movies as well. There's a king, for instance, that has 3 sons, and one of the sons is the youngest, is the weakest, is the least experienced, and it's actually that son that saves the king and the kingdom. The brothers cannot do much, but it's that weakling, or the dumbling, as it's called in the fairy tales, is the one that brings some flow of energy, because that part of us, which is the most undeveloped, is closest to our unconscious. And that can be a carrier, a psychopomp for letting in all these psychic forces within our ego disposition. And we have seen a lot of motifs. Again, I have 2 more slides and then this is over. We can go to the questions and answers. But if you have seen the fairy tales, you've seen always there is some sort of an imbalance. And at the end of the fairy tale, there is a balance. So when you look at any of these modern stories or fairy tales, you see that the feminine principle or the feminine figures are missing. Most of the times, the mother of the hero is missing. There is the absence of a positive feminine energy in the life of the hero. The Beauty and the Beast, the mother passed away. Harry Potter's mother had passed away. In Wizard of Oz, Dorothy's mother had passed away and she was being taken care of by her aunt. In Rumpelstiltskin, we don't know what had happened to the mother. There's always this absence of the feminine energy. There's an imbalance. There's a lack. And towards the end, things get balanced somehow. There is somehow a pairing up and matching of forces, and more balance and harmony is created. Looking at this again from a psychic lens, these 4 phases, you can say that we start from the unconscious, when everything is unconscious. This is where we are born. We come out of the mother's womb. We don't have a consciousness of our own. So little by little, we start developing this consciousness. We realize what is good for us, what society will reward us for, what our parents like to see. And these, some sort of reinforcements or motifs that out there exist, push us towards suppressing some of the parts within us. So some parts are somehow suppressed, they are kept unconscious, and the unconscious parts within us can only manifest through projections. So we can only see what's unconscious within us in the world out there, and by projecting it upon other people. So the sources of basically our frustrations, our tensions that we have with individuals, most of the times is because of this projection of unconscious material that we have within us. So if we make this unconscious material conscious, we take ownership of that, these projections will fade away. We suddenly see that the same person that we had trouble looking at is not that evil anymore, because we have somehow taken ownership of the evil. We know that it's ours. So if you understand the hero's journey, you see that in all these stories where the villain is out there, you're fighting the Darth Vaders, the Agent Smiths, they're actually forces within us that we need to integrate. They're not out there. This somehow projections of ours that turn the people or characters or circumstances out there somehow evil. They render them evil. They render them disgusting, and at times very frustrating for us. And once we take ownership of that, we know what we're conscious of. We shine some light upon them. We may still not be able to integrate them, but this knowledge serves a lot. Finally, we need to create a new personality that includes this tension of the opposites in the conscious and the unconscious. So the hero's journey, the hero's quest is going deep within, finding the evil within, coming to terms with that, and integrating it back into our lives. Understanding what are those things that we're not good at? What are the sources of our fascinations and frustrations with individuals out there? This is an important signal for us in terms of our development. And finally, Jung says, the greatest and most important problems of life are all, in a certain sense, insoluble. They can never be solved, but only outgrown. This outgrowing was seen to consist in a new level of consciousness. So somehow we outgrow problems, we don't solve them. By taking this journey, we somehow achieve a different level of consciousness that can help us outgrow these problems. This is more or less it, what I had to show you. A couple of announcements about what we do in Design Dissolve before we get to the questions. So first of all, if you're here now, you're on a journey. Your appearance today in this webinar is somehow responding to a call to adventure, something within you. We actually had a very cryptic, not very easily discernible poster for this. You know, we somehow copied ideas from 2001: A Space Odyssey, put it out there, you know, the Odyssey of the hero, without any tangible gains being mentioned out of, because people are looking for things that are very applicable, applied, and utilitarian right now. So in our case, it was designed in a cryptic way. So the fact that you made it here shows that you're on a quest, you're on a journey. And in Design Dissolve, we are doing things to help individuals like yourselves to go forward with your journeys. And towards this expansion of understanding and consciousness, we as well gain in a similar way in these journeys by just accompanying you. So we have three assumptions in what we do. Our assumption is that thinking is not synonymous with analysis. Not all thinking is analyzing. We have different types of thinking. Today we saw pattern thinking, this lateral thinking, connection seeking, holistic thinking. These are important ways of thinking that we need to tap into in order to fully realize the power of our thinking function. Then thinking is one of the four functions of consciousness. If we want to tap to our human potential, we need to somehow understand the other functions. This is basically the hero's journey, understanding if we lack something on the feeling side, on the intuition side, or on the thinking side. Somehow developing these four functions in harmony is a task, is a journey of individuation, growth, and development. And finally, our conscious attitude is only a part of our totality of our psyche. We have unconscious processes. These are the sources of ideas, creativities for us. As David Lynch says, these are where we can catch big fish, outsized discoveries, radical innovations. They all come out of a space which is deeply embedded within our unconscious processes. We should be hunters in this dark space, go down there, catch big fish, and come out. Based on these three assumptions, we have designed three different types of courses. We have the Systems Thinking Foundation, which expands the thinking space. We have Design Beyond Thinking. It's not beyond design thinking. It's designed beyond thinking, which taps into feeling and intuition and the sensation functions, because design thinking, in my opinion, is very limited in a way, because it's focused a lot about thinking and it disregards the other functions that we have. And finally, we have courses that help you to access your creative forces within you, or tapping into your unconscious processes. We have two courses starting soon, and we have one course in systems thinking starting on October 25th. It's going to be 6 Mondays, and we have one course starting on designing for resonance, which is part of our Design Beyond Thinking Foundation that starts on Tuesday, October 6th. So this is what we do in Design Dissolve, exploring and helping you explore and expand your human potential. With that slide, I end my presentation, and I'll be very happy if I could respond to your questions and your comments.
Any questions from anyone?
Very inspiring talk. Thanks. You had the slide with the compartmentalization and the decaying civilizations. I was curious about how this relates to design. I could relate to it, sort of thinking about poorly functioning organizations that do not want to cooperate with each other, that become bureaucratic. I don't know if you want to expand on that.
Absolutely. I think, Peter, we can use the microphone on my computer here so that we avoid the feedback. Yeah, this fragmentation is basically a plague right now, that we see it everywhere. You see it in education, topics being divided based on let's say, disciplines being divided based on topics, and silos that do not connect. We see it in organizations. We see it in academia a lot. So if you want to secure an academic position, the best thing you can do is to find a silo and dig as deep as possible down where no one has dug before. Then you maximize your chances of becoming tenured. So this is the world where we're living in. It's all fragments. For instance, I think what happened with COVID taught us a lesson that things are not as distant in time and space as we think. Things that may seem distant are not that distant. Something that happens in China can influence us. And topics are multifaceted. So COVID was not only, let's say, a health problem, it was also a political issue. It became a personal freedom issue. It became a technological one. It had so many different facets to it. So the nature of reality is multifaceted. The nature of our analysis is somehow fragmented. This is something that we need to think about. But it's not all out there. It's also in here. So this is all the argument I want to make here. The hero's journey is not something out there. So if we see that in organizations, that organizations are fragmented and they're divided in terms of org charts, functions, roles, and these functions and roles do not talk to one another most of the times. Like in academic departments within a university, I was in academia for a long time, never spoke to our next door neighbors, no one came knocking our doors. Guys, what are you doing? And the fiercest critiques of any field are people who come actually exactly from a similar vicinity of that field. They are the fiercest critique who want to kill that field. So this is the interesting things. But there are all of these things happening out there. Our task is to project this inward before dealing with that in the outer world, which is sometimes beyond our control, our area of influence. Let's look at ourselves. What compartments do we have within us, right? What is it that we are compartmentalizing within us? If we act inconsistently from time to time, if there is dissonances in our behavior, once in one context we act in one way, similar situation, different context, we act in a different way. Let's just start with those first, because that is the hero's task. Is not an outward. On all these movies, there is this picture of the hero who accomplishes something, is a warrior type, goes out there, slays dragons, and they're all outward events and circumstances. But those dragons are within us, things that keep us in this space of comfort. A lot of the tools that we use in design thinking, for instance, or in many of the disciplines, they give us the illusion of tapping into uncertainty and bringing uncertainty to a level of certitude, reducing uncertainty a little bit, but they don't actually. So going into uncertainty is the task of the hero, going there and holding this tension and somehow allowing yourself to be in the belly of the whale, to be swallowed by the change, not looking for a foothold or a safety island or something to cling to, just going into it to see what happens. Sometimes my PhD students, most of the times they tell me that they are lost, they are confused, and they don't know where they're going, what they're doing. And I tell them, well, that's beautiful because that is research. That shows that you are researching. If you know exactly what you're doing, where you're going, and what is happening, that's not research, it's a simple search. So being comfortable with those spaces is a sign of growth in character. It evokes a quality of character, being in uncertainty and ambiguity and complexity, that for our times, this is the hero's journey, in my opinion, going to those spaces without looking for something to hold on to and see what happens, see what emerges out of that. What lesson is waiting for us? The Austrian poet Maria Rilke says, as you descend down into the abyss, go downwards in a vertical movement, there is something that is also moving upwards in an opposite direction to meet you at that point. There will be an encounter. There will be some sort of a supernatural aid, quote unquote, something, a moment of enlightenment, a realization that comes to your aid. And then you come back up with a boon. So somehow trusting the bungee and jumping, into this world is, I think, the hero's journey for us, going into the fields that we haven't experimented with, going there, improvising things to see what happens, what type of reactions do we, letting go of the planned life to see what type of life is going to unfold for us and emerge for us. I don't know if I answered your question at all, but these are the thoughts that I thought I could share.
Great, thanks.
And we have a question. Can you hear me through the microphone of Arash?
Can you hear Peter?
Hello, can you hear me? Very good. So there was a question from Lisa. It makes sense to her, but can we translate this to a model of organizations? Now, I wanted to butcher one of Arash's stories that that I think sort of fits it here. That a moth goes to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician asks, like, "Moth, what are you doing here?" "Well, life has been hard recently. I can't at work, it's difficult. I can't connect to my wife either. Also having trouble connecting with my children. It's really hard, and I've been thinking a lot about this." And then the pediatrician says, "Yes, moth, but I'm a pediatrician. I can't help it any of that. And you're a moth. Like, what are you doing here?" And the moth says, "Well, the light was on." And what I feel is that at the beginning of our careers and in school, we're taught that there are these problems and there are these tools for it. And at that point, we think, oh, organizations, if only they knew, or teams, if only they knew about this tool, this canvas, then they'd be able to do it. And then we start working with these tools. And then we realize often that these tools are sort of the first step, but very often people sort of continue holding on to them. And we hear from the participants in our courses as well that they are finding the limits of what is sold basically as the solvable solution. They're finding the limits to that. And I think that the systems thinking and the psychological side, so the systems thinking courses and that we do, and the Define Beyond Thinking address this from two different perspectives. One looks at the fact that organizations, whenever they get into problems, or teams, or even individuals, they go to their values formulas and do them over and over again and try to wring the answers out of them, but it often doesn't work. And similar things happen to organizations as well, that they reorganize and then reorganize again. It's just a constant loop of reorganizing. They're always trying to solve things with the same tools, either with just thinking, or rather they only look at the individual parts of the system rather than the whole. And the tools that we think need to be brought in at this point is, one is system thinking, on looking at not just the individual elements, not just the individual departments, but the organization as a whole. Or on the other side, not just doing thinking, not just using thinking to solve these challenges, but letting emergence and other parts their role as well. The funny thing is that in our view, I am way more the traditional person, and Rash is the one who's running in the front with the torch. But it's very hard not to see these elements of the limits of what we are doing. And then I see that this is sort of where this can be used for organizations. It's trying to question the tools that are used all the time and coming up with something that's very different and very new and sometimes unknown. But just because the light is on and you fly to the pediatrician, just because that that's the tool that is not or is known to the organization or is comfortable, doesn't mean you should be using it. So I hope that Lisa, that somewhat answers the question on how to use this for organizations.
We have thanks for that, Peter. Thank you. We have Tanya and Sam who have two questions. Let's go to a question from Tanya, and then we go to Sam's question, which is a very important point. Tanya, please.
Yeah, I have a question. Basically, I think it builds on about this whole organizational part and level of uncertainty and ambiguity. So I think like it's applicable for individual's life, and I can see like within myself how can apply for myself. But when I go to work and try to apply this level of uncertainty and lack of planning, let's say, or like rigid planning that goes there, it seems that it's a path of constant conflict within like a workspace. So I was just wondering if you have any comments on that, because it seems like very tiresome in the long run.
Yeah, well, absolutely. You know, there is, you know, one task of the hero is to realize what is beyond his circle of influence. You know, not. I always say that, you know, there are people who want to save the world single-handedly. You know, that is not a heroic quest. Heroic quest is you get a quest that you can actually you need to stretch your ability and competence to a degree, and to be able to meet that, but it's still within your circle of influence. It's something that you could do. It's not something that is not out of your control. So let's see, there's nothing much you could do at the level of an organization as a whole, because there are so many forces that are basically in interaction when it comes to an entity like that. So the question is, what can we do as individuals? You know, the answer for me is always showing, not telling. You know, embodying those properties within us, and every day living by these principles. And at some point, what we do will basically have an impact. It will create some sort of a, let's say, resonance. People will become curious about it. They'll come to us. They will talk to us about it. And it may not be in our lifetime. We should be comfortable that these changes, you know, I'd always say these sustainability enthusiasts, are they comfortable with the fact that what they are trying to achieve may not happen in their lifetime? Is it, if you tell them that, some of them will panic, because it's not actually a true quest that they are pursuing. It's something that is in some sort of an ego inflation that wants them to achieve something. It's more like a projection of an inner journey that is not yet taken in an outer world. They haven't taken it inward. Now they want projecting it outward, and they want to make something big to compensate for that lack within them. So basically, the way I would tell you that at the level of the organization, you should just do your best, do what you do, live your life in accordance to this principle, and wait for emergencies to happen. You know, without pushing things, because going again, you know, universities where I've taught, I have experienced that. Going around telling people, hey guys, come on, break down the silos. What does this mean? What are you doing? Let's do transdisciplinary stuff. Let's gather together. Put aside all the buzzwords and jargons and the topics. Talk about a process. Talk about a real life situation that the students may encounter afterwards. And talk about how, well, it doesn't work. The system is not at that level yet. The level of consciousness of that system is not high enough, right? So what you could do is that you could still live by some principles within what you do at that organization. You know, I always said, if I cannot change the curriculum, I can change my courses every time I teach them. Even if I cannot change the whole course, I can change the sessions, right? Every interaction can embody some ideas from this. So starting small is something that we could do right now with what we've got, with accepting all the limitations. And accepting these limitations is also a heroic quest as well. So this is also, there's a heroic stance to it. I hope that answered your question, Tanya. And otherwise we can talk about it more in the course when we meet up again. And Sam has got a great question. Sam, do you want to unmute yourself, talk a little bit about it, or do you want me to read the question? Whichever that you like.
I don't mind, Arash. I can ask.
Please go ahead, Sam. Let us hear you.
So there's obviously a massive, or at least I hope there is a massive focus on this kind of very white focus of design and how we conceptualize ourselves as being the sort of heroes in terms of solving the problems for people rather than helping them co-design. And I just wonder how you balance this concept of the hero's journey with a kind of need for humility and a need for learning and trusting and working with people who have lived experience over and above kind of coming in and taking that kind of heroic leap and going, I found out all this stuff, I'm going to solve it now. Yeah, I wondered what you thought about that.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, these archetypes are sometimes so misinterpreted and misunderstood that is unbelievable. Well, the hero's journey is not about a hero figure, you know, it's not about a figure, it's not about someone who is out there, a patriarchal figure that is the leader that can achieve things, you know, and it's not all about that. It's about a process. It's a process in which we go and we integrate stuff within us, the things that we have pushed down, those type of ideas that we detest out there, they belong to us, claiming ownership of them, first of all, you know, say this is our stuff. This is, instead of polluting my environment with my projections, I own them. I own the shit. This is my stuff I'm projecting on those people, those situations. This is basically a cyclical journey, going in, finding and meeting with the villains inside us, and somehow reuniting with them, holding our own ground, and somehow bringing back some of their vitality back into our lives, because the unconscious is the source of our psychic energy as well. So there is a difference between the hero figure and the hero archetype. What you are talking about here is a hero figure, an individual. And Jung talks about killing of the hero. Says if you want the hero archetype to live, the hero needs to die. So these cycles of death and resurrections that the hero needs to go through, you know, dying to itself and bringing back new contents up and re-emergence with new personality, will result in the humility of the hero. Because when the Rilke says encounters with the mystery result in the defeat of the ego. So going into the mystery results in defeats. These defeats are humiliating. Humility and basically somehow paying more attention to the things around us. And that's the point that you're making here, which is it's not about an individual. It's not about an individuality at all. It's about individuation. You know, it's about becoming that unique person that we need to become. And that is happening by going through these cycles of death and resurrection, by jumping deep down into our depth of our psyche, coming into contact with those contents, finding the ways of doing that, first of all, seeking access to those contents, to those areas. And then once we have access, we should have acceptance and integration of the material. This is basically the task of the hero. Is not then the outer world is the world of secondary effects. This is what Jung also talks about. Says out there is a world of secondary effects, projections, or mirror images of what we are living in here. So I know there's a lot of confusion about this, but once the hero jumps down there and understands all these, let's say, assumptions, mental models that are flawed, and he's holding on to, and he's identifying with, and he's letting go of them. This is an exercise in humility. This is an exercise in growth, development, and raising in the level of consciousness. I hope it could answer your question to some extent, Sam. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Sam. So we can take one last question if there is something someone wants to say, if there are comments.
There was a question from Elena asking about good, and there's another question from Merdad. Perfect. So I'll briefly answer Elena's question, who's asking how the courses of design dissolve are sort of built up and how they connect to the previous courses. Basically, right now, there are two main parts of it. One looks inwards, the other looks outwards. The one that looks outwards is a systems thinking course. It consists of three or systems thinking foundation. It consists of three courses. One is is called Thinking in Systems. That is what we used to run under a different name called Systems Thinking for Service Designers. But we evolved a bit, we iterated, and the basis of the course is the same, but it's now a bit more evolved. And then there are two other linked elements, which are called Introduction to Complexity Language and Mastering Complexity Language, which deal more about less so the qualitative, but rather the quantitative side of systems thinking. And then there is the other foundation, which looks inwards, which is design beyond thinking. And that includes also three foundations or three courses that build upon each other. Elena, we're happy to detail further. Just reach out to us via mail, and we're happy to even jump on a call if needed, or you can check it out on the website where it's visually represented as well. And then Merdad's question. I was thinking about the possible combinations by system thinking as we see the holistic image where problems exist, and we can help solve the problem as a leader, designer, or rather roles by following the hero's archetype. Fresh.
Well, I would say amen. That is that is great stuff, Merdad. Yeah, I think this you're putting together some ideas, and that is great. Great stuff. Keep it up. Very good. So do we have another webinar before the year end, Peter, or that's it?
We don't have one scheduled yet.
Yeah.
Maybe we will be able to have one in early December. We'll
Okay.
see. What we also want to do, we have a very strong alumni from large and small organizations alike, and some of them are also here, and they've been doing some good stuff and putting into practice what they've got out of the course. What we'd like to do is also have some webinars where it's actually they talking and sort of either challenging the things that they learned or showing how it's been put into practice. So it's not just a theory, but also the practical parts that we could show. And we hope that we'll be able to do some of those in the very near future.
So stay tuned, and we'll keep you posted about those developments.
And then without further ado, thank you all very much. And with that, you can reach us on learning at dissolve.design or on dissolve.design, our website. Thank you all, and talk later.